Hey Collective, it's Al. I'm coming to you with a video that will be a continuation of the ongoing series I've been releasing as of late, surrounding some of the more impressionable impulses I've been getting from a higher principle, kind of guiding me through this particular pivot in my life. And a particular dream that came to me that had a lot more to do with some of you who will be observing this, or just people in general who will be facing changes and adjustments to their life and their life path as the conclave continues to send notes and rewrites and so forth as to what's to come. So in order to get into this, I have to kind of explain the dream and its correlation to another dream I had and how prophetic it was, and more to the point, what it meant to us as a greater collective. And so to begin, the other night I had a dream where I was being invited to a particular event. And when I arrived at the event, I was still dressed in my regular everyday uniform that I would wear at the restaurant. And that I arrived to this particular event, a big scale event, and that they immediately knew who I was and immediately ushered me to the VIP line, where I was then surrounded by a lot of actors and different archetypes and so forth that were pretty well known in the world, and that we were being quickly ushered into the set, onto whatever was waiting on the other side of what I was waiting to get into. And I was feeling a little insecure at the time because I was like, why am I in this line? I didn't really understand what was going on. And so as I get to the front of it with other notable figures, they seemed to know who I was. And when I got to the front, I was basically verifying my identification, and they were like, no need to. But I had already taken out my wallet, and so I was fumbling through my cards and stuff looking for my identification. And as I did that, they gave me my band, and then all of a sudden I looked, and there was a woman who was basically running whatever the event was that I was participating in. And I look at her, and I look down, and everybody else is like in formal wear, or a lot more business attire, looking really snazzy and good. And here I was dressed in my old expression of self in my uniform coming from work. And so I immediately go, oh my gosh, let me go change. I have to go change. I can't go in looking like this. And she looks at me and she goes, yeah, well, you always look better in your jacket and suit. So just go put that on. You have a room upstairs, so just do that. You have about 20 minutes to get dressed and then come down. So I get up to, in the dream, it was a lucid dream, and I get up to my area, and I walk into my room, and there's a woman standing there, obviously with a bunch of clothes draped over the thing, waiting for me to arrive in order for me to get dressed. And so as I'm getting out of my clothes and getting into the right attire for where I was going, a costume change, if you will, I was then realizing that in my wallet I couldn't find my ID that I had been looking for to begin with. And though everyone knew who I was, the fact that I couldn't find my identification really stressed me out. And so I told her, well, let me get dressed real quick. I got to go back downstairs and I have to find my ID because I can't get anywhere. And I felt almost like I needed to verify who I was in the dream, that because everybody has their ID, and it just kind of stressed me out. And so I ran back downstairs in the dream, dressed now, and I had everything I needed, and I'm now going back to the different places I was looking for this identification. And I started to really stress out because I can't go to the event if I don't have my ID. They're gonna question me. Why am I here and all this stuff? I need to have my ID. And I was so stressed about it that the lady who was dressing me hands me 2 cards that have a picture of me, one in red and one in green ink on a white card. And she was like, just use this. This is your identification. Why are you stressed out? But I was about to miss the event because I was so worried about my ID that it woke me from the lucid dream and my overreaction to having lost it, because I had already gotten all my credentials and all the things I needed, and I was dressed. Why would I be freaking out about a stupid lost ID when I can just get a new ID? And I had all these other forms of identification. So because it was such a lucid dream, what woke me was my overreaction and my sabotageal need to find this ID instead of just going into the event, and what it meant to me as I woke up. So one of the great things about being a lucid dreamer, for those of you who don't really understand lucid dreaming, is that it's so vivid that you're actually there. And it reflects what I've told you guys for years now on the channel and on my writing, or through my writing, that when I go to sleep, I take lectures, I go to classes, I do all this other stuff. I rarely ever get some sleep, and you guys know I've even said that I've had to do paperwork at my desk in my dream space. And so these are very lucid dreams where I'm actually experiencing these things, and I've had private training sessions with different forms of life and so forth. And so the idea of me having this overreaction suddenly in the dream was the perfect way to wake me up to immediately analyze what was going on in the dream and how it affects other people. And so what I realized when I woke up is that I was facing the loss of identification and almost an imposter syndrome scenario that I would be in danger of when I arrive at whatever the event is that is about to happen for us as a collective. And to understand that everyone in the dream knew who I was. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone. I had already been invited to the VIP line at this event. And what I was doing was going through the imposter syndrome in the dream space, where my big panic was the identification of who I was, as though I still needed to prove something to someone, and my fear of being an imposter and feeling like I didn't belong there and hadn't been invited to begin with, even though the dream specifically said, even the lady who was at the head of it, who's running the event, goes, here you go, change, you have your room. Like, everything had been set up. There was no reason for me to be having this reaction. So when I woke up, I realized that what, like I had mentioned in the previous video, as the conclave and the elders or whatever your spiritual principle is that you believe in meet and do the final rewrites for this next leg of the journey, that a lot of us are going to be mentioned in spaces that we don't necessarily know or haven't directly been to, because it maybe somebody has seen something that we have done creatively, or that they have been following our journey for whatever reason, because again, you never know who's watching you. But if you're a spiritualist, especially if you're somebody who studies more esoteric things and you understand the higher realms and the hierarchy, you understand that there's a big pivot here going on for all of society. We're dealing with a lot of karma, and we're setting the stage for something new. That I, and many of you who will come across this, a couple of you now, and then I'm told the impulse I got or the impression I got was that it'll be more relevant to others as this ball begins to move forward. But to understand that you earned your place to be there. And according to the hierarchy or whatever you believe in, you have been hand-selected to play a part in something that is now playing out on the world stage. And what I was going through was a knee-jerk reaction that some of you may have, and not realizing that it is your experiences that led you to who you are today, that is why you were chosen to play the role that you're about to play on the stage somehow. And to understand that you will deal in that moment with the loss of identity, where you're suddenly being gifted a new life experience at the expense of an old one, which is what the symbology was for the idea. I mean, you can get a new idea, it's not a big deal. But in the dream, I had mentioned something interesting to the person who was dressing me. I said, oh my God, she was like, here's an idea. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm so stressed out about this idea because I haven't even got my birth certificate back yet, blah, 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 blah. And that will play a part into what happened later the afternoon of this same day. So the moral of the story is, sometimes when good things happen to people, when they're hand-selected or someone scouts them or something really beautiful that was always meant to happen happens to someone who has gone through so much struggle or turmoil in their dedication of theosophy or their exploration or whatnot, when suddenly you're picked for something, that it can be even more jarring than being passed over, because now you're front and center and there's an identity crisis that can occur. And the dream was basically stating for me to parlay something specific. They know who you are, and they've known who you are for a while. And if you are part of the new stage being set, the hierarchy is moving you into position now, not later. And that though you are leaving the old baggage of who you were before, you are taking the amalgamation of all of those life experiences and the knowledge and wisdom that you have garnered over lifetimes, possibly, that you are being selected to then fulfill a character or a role or an archetype in the newer design that's unfolding. And to understand that you're truly not losing anything, you're just dropping the baggage and possibly the karma. And so when good things happen to people who have never really experienced that, it can be quite jarring. And you get into this whole thing of imposter syndrome. So what I'm supposed to say to you guys is this. If you're a spiritualist, if you're a true aspirant, just like the big JC said, any true student with an earnest heart that really wants to discover the mysteries of the universe will be granted access to the halls of wisdom. But that doesn't mean that they're going to make it, because they can sabotage themselves or do all sorts of stuff. But to understand that once they're given granted access to particular things in life, or they're leveled up or raised up, to understand that it is well earned, and to lay down this whole feeling of imposter syndrome, because you are receiving either good karma or you're receiving good karma for the things that you have accumulated over time. And it's very important at this juncture for me to fulfill the role that they then gave me later that day after I had the epiphany of what the dream was about. So before I get into that, let me just remind everyone, where we're going is an evolutionary thing. It has a lot to do with a unitive approach of a collective consciousness that expands and moves onward. And a lot of it's going to be done in group mentality, meaning group think. And you are representing different departments in different theologies, philosophies, structures, religions, all that stuff, they're now tasked with the ability to try to establish right relations with the world around you. And the players that we're talking about right now have been hand-selected, gone over, and chosen to represent some aspect of the greater design for the new stage being set. And that they are basically hitting their marks. And as they do, are becoming conscious in the physical form of each other. And this is a super important part. Because one of the things that happened on the same day when I woke up was several things, actually, all in one day, where I got all of this information on my algorithm about specific teachers that I've come across in the past. In my reviewing recently, as I told you guys, I've been reviewing a lot of the same material that I've been studying over time, but only in the bridge sections, like very quickly. And the three of them in particular suddenly showed up in my algorithm all at once. And it was William Meader, it was Dr. Robert Gilbert, who I absolutely love and adore. I have a crush on him. And that, not that that's a here or there, but the way he thinks is brilliant to me, who's also present. And then a man by the name of Robert Grant, who I only knew to look at the video of him talking to Dr. Robert Gilbert because I had just seen the night before, synchronicity, something on Gaia called Codex that he was hosting about Leonardo da Vinci. That for those of you who don't know how important Leonardo da Vinci is to this particular world, then let's just say that it was very applicable and one of my favorite individuals ever in the history of the world. One of my favorite teachers that, basically molded all of the Rosicrucian, all of this stuff. He's a very symbolic, wonderfully creative genius that existed. So the fact that I had stumbled upon Robert Grant, or Robert Edward Grant, I believe his name is. I just met him the night before. I had never seen his work. I mean, I might have seen it, but it had never flashed in my head. Now remember, in the dream that I had that morning, I was going to be involved with something that was going on with very influential people of some kind. And though I'm not egoish and not saying that that's necessarily what my role will be, I did start to get an idea of what the role or what part I would be playing by watching the interaction between those three individuals. William Meader having obviously been consistent on my page. You guys know that as far as esoteric theosophy, he's my number one choice for a new student who's learning the path and moving forward. He's my first person I would always recommend. But in that, Dr. Robert Gilbert has the Vesica Pisces, which I have been very conscious of. In fact, I just messaged him yesterday because of the dreams and all of this synchronicity about something kind of unrelated, but kind of on point. The point is that I had been aware of him and his involvement with the Rosicrucian order, and the involvement of the fact that he's actually tied into Leonardo da Vinci, who you guys know I've been talking about with my review of the Pista Sophia and the depiction of it in the Last Supper that he painted. And coincidentally, in the conversation that popped up on this day between Dr. Robert Gilbert and Robert Edward Grant, they tackled the subject of Rosicrucianism and how Leonardo da Vinci was intertwined. But again, I could not have known who Robert Grant was if I had not inadvertently the day before on Gaia stumbled across Codex. So the reason I'm saying this to you is that you all are being brought towards each other in a fulfillment of something that is important to the collective consciousness. And whether you directly interact with each other or not, you are going to be getting notes, if you're in right alignment, to how you're going to move forward in the world starting now that the rewriting of the script and so forth has been set into motion. And those of you who graduated and were selected are then going to be getting impulses of information of what to do next and how to move forward. Not necessarily pointing out who or how, but knowing your role and understanding how you fit into the greater construct. And so what was revealed to me on the same day was I was watching the interaction between Robert Gilbert and Robert Grant. And when I tell you it was a love fest, I just love that content. One of the things I noticed is how excited they were to talk to each other. And the camaraderie, because Robert Grant comes across more of a hermeticist, and so he's a great gateway to hermeticism and kind of the more explorative. He's done a lot of great work in the pyramids and stuff like that, and the symbology of sacred numbers and sacred geometry and all this stuff. They were just going at it. And I'm going to connect the link on the bottom, but if I remember properly, let me look it up. It had a very interesting name, but it was on Robert Grant's channel called Think Tank, and the name of it was Uncovering the Ancient Knowledge from the Renaissance with Dr. Robert Gilbert. And it basically had this entire conversation between two brilliant minds having this amazing conversation about all of the connectability and the threads of theosophy and theology and philosophy and psychology that all threaded into almost a pattern that we were all exploring unitively. But one of the things that I noticed in their conversation is they were so excited to talk to each other that there were moments that I could see that the audience may not understand wording that was being used, because their target audience at the time was each other and other brilliant minds at that level, but that I was watching carefully as to where the breaks in the conversation would come for just an onlooking person who accidentally stumbles into it, which is kind of the path that we're going, right? If the collective consciousness is going to move forward, we leave no soul behind. So it became very clear to me that one of my skill sets from childhood was resurfacing in this moment, which is I'm one of those people who falls into the IQ of like 131, 132. And so I've been surrounded by very brilliant minds most of my life. But I have this tendency to be the person who is very conscious and intuitively aware of anyone auditing the conversation externally. Meaning, I'm always conscious of how people are observing two people having a conversation. And usually with two people, it's a little bit more intimate. But with a third person, it draws a crowd. And suddenly you start to notice that there are people who may look like they're not listening to you, but who are actually overhearing the conversation. And if we really truly are to soar and to evolve to where we need to be, then sometimes you need a middleman that plays the layman or has no ego issue with asking a stupid question to a group of people who know that they're not stupid, but who will intrinsically know what they're doing in sort of a panel discussion. Because it brings everyone to the table when you have someone ask a question that they intuitively know the audience will have in the dialogue that's happening. And it's been kind of one of my staples continuously for most of my life. I've always been some sort of mediator for high conceptual thought forms and breaking it down into digestible ways of understanding things. And so as I was watching it, I started to get this desire and kind of this impulse from above that I needed to sit in space and really think about how I could be of service to a conversation, even if independent from them. And that's where this video came from. So as I sat in meditation, something very interesting popped into my head, and I wanted to read it to you because I literally had to write it down. And it said, and it came from above, which is basically the role I would then be serving as I move forward into whatever lays on the other side of this video being released. And what it says is, my role on this earth is to help explore the topics that most expand upon consciousness from a multitude of perspectives. For I am to serve as a form of mediator to some of the most brilliant of minds in terms of intuitively knowing when to ask the right questions the greater audience may have so as to bring as many people to the table. It is not, however, to prove or disprove a theory, concept, or higher ideal, but rather to help guide the student body into finding out for themselves. As in the end, only those that do the actual work can ever truly enter the great hall of wisdom, a space where the most brilliant of spiritual teachers await those who are willing to move forward consciously into a greater self-awareness and a new earth that awaits. Making my mission statement now in this moment, setting the stage for all that's about to come. So I sat in that moment. It was so clear to me that it came so vividly, I literally was able to write it down. I remembered every word that I got in the meditative thing, and I wrote it. And I even asked my higher mind, like, did I get anything wrong? And it was like, nope, that's exactly what you're supposed to say. So having no idea of the who or how this comes together, it suddenly became very clear that I needed to set the stage for how this is going to play out and why it's playing out. So humanity is in the adulting phase. And if you understand that we are all students within the Great Earth Academy, you understand that there's different students at different levels of the scholastic experience. And each of them have their own life experience. And many people experience the world through their trauma, and as they work to deal with the shadow that surrounds it and then heal the wounds that most hurt them. And as they move up the ladder, they begin looking so introvertedly that they start to deal with psychology, spirituality, and they do a self-exploratory thing where they begin to truly know who they are. But during that process, you begin to study higher conceptual thought forms that somehow bridge gaps that exist between maybe different houses of faith or different fields of science. And you begin to see the patterning of how they're coming together. And the new stage that's being set is exactly that. laying the foundation of the structure that will operate for the sixth root race that is incoming, and the elders and masters who are returning to help guide and navigate the student body forward. In a unitive approach, where they value and validate the life experience of each student as it fits into the greater pie, and each of us to then reach some sort of mastery within ourselves, then become collective consciousness driven, we perspective. How do we as a people move forward? How do we as a people get over these hurdles? What can we do to break bread with each? All of that becomes who you are. But in that process, you go through purifications and you go through all of this stuff. And for those of you who are spiritual who would be watching this, you know what I'm talking about. You go through body changes, you go through ascension symptoms, you go through all sorts of things, and suddenly you become very selective of how you use your words, because you understand that the word is power and how you use the word is very important. So then you have to get this particular skill set that you have to develop of how to audit yourself as you're speaking, so as to not share too much but still reveal what needs to be revealed, especially if you work as a messenger or a teacher's aide or a guide or whatnot. You have to know when to hold something and when to fold it, meaning when to not say anything and when to say something. So what you don't realize is that's an auditioning process if you really look at it from the standpoint of putting on a massive production like the Great Earth Academy. And one of the things that became very intrinsic to my experience with this, which brought me the most joy, is how many other pieces fell into place yesterday. And I'll get into that in a moment. But one of the things that happens with the Great Earth Academy is it takes a lot of vision and a lot of holding and meditative practice of the higher logos, or what you believe in God and so forth, to hold the vision of Earth so that the souls can experience the physicality of what it is to make certain choices in their life. And then from that, someday either master themselves or become a disciple or an aspirant or whatnot. And as you do your journey, you share your journey in order to connect with other cohorts within the academy, which becomes super important to where this is going now. So when I was reviewing it and the dream, one of the things that became very clear is that I knew my role. And after a while of me sitting here waiting and not understanding what I could bring to the table, it suddenly became so clear the moment that they told me specifically what was going to happen next. So one of the things that I sent an email to, I'll share this part, I don't think he'll mind because I don't even know if he'll see it. But one of the things I said to Mr. Gilbert, because I sent him an email, is like, I love the conversation that he had with him and Robert Grant. It was so fascinating. I'm definitely going to link it into the description below. You guys are going to love it if you're a spiritualist, if you're on the path. The only thing I was thinking as I was listening, I was like, well, there would have been great if there was someone like me, a student, that could then ask the questions on behalf of the other students, even if they knew the answer. And so that they would know that the third person knew what the answer would be, but they knew they were playing the part of the student who was observing it. Taking it out of the construct of just a conversation between two super intellectual minds, brilliant minds, explorers. They call them polymaths. These two brilliant polymaths, they were so engaged in the conversation, but they were so into it with each other that a third person being present would have played a key part in possibly expanding the conversation to bring accidental viewership, which is no such thing as accidental, but bringing newer students who stumble upon it into the conversation so as to keep pace with the interest and all of the synergy that was going on between the two. It's fascinating. In the same way that when you look at William Meader give a lecture on esotericism and Alice Bailey's writings and so forth, you discover how much energy and synergy he has with the people who are in his classes. And what if you brought those three minds together and had a conversation? And so the thing I said to Dr. Gilbert in the email is I go, one person having a singular thought is great, but two people is phenomenal, right? It's even greater. But three people is divinity. It's a divine inspiration. It's the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And each of them all representing different aspects of divinity, having engaging dialogue and conversation that will be beneficial to society if put in somehow of public format. And I just left it at that. I have no aim here. I just shot that off to him because I thought if they involve a third person or even a fourth person acting as the pillars, because you can have like a, let's say, one was represented Hermeticism, so that would be Grant, and then you would have Gilbert representing the Rosicrucian, and then you would have, let's say, William Meader representing the esoteric faith, and then you would have a student or a mediator between the three that know all three fields well enough to then ask the questions the audience is then tapping into and bringing them along for the ride. And so it was a very interesting way in which to then look at the rise of the Aquarian age and that whole of that whole thought process, and more to the point, understanding why it is phrased that there will be a turquoise leadership that rises at this particular juncture in time to teach the student body that is coming into manifestation as we speak, and that we are tying up the loose ends that are needed in order to move the species forward. And so as I began to see that, I began to realize some of the things that I would say to students, who in particular will be following this for some reason down the road. They said in short order, but for some reason it will become much more interesting to a greater number of people on the other side of this video, and I don't question, it's a surprise. Whatever's going to happen is already divinely being orchestrated. But one of the things I noticed was how I got into the conversation. And it wasn't like me being egoish and be like, oh, I want to be part of it. Instead, I was just, as an audience member, picking up on something that could expand it even a little bit more in a different way because of my naivete and sometimes my ability to understand when people are speaking about the exact same thing in different vernacular and finding a way to bridge it in a way that other people then go, oh, okay, they're talking about the same thing. And it's sometimes as simple as playing the dumb one, because I have no problem being the blonde, and no offense to blonde people, but to be the blonde person in the audience and be like, I don't understand something, even though I know the answer. But if I can sense intuitively, which is one of my skill sets, that the audience is going to have a moment where it breaks the conversation and there's a barrier formed, then I can break the barrier in the conversation, and they will know that I'm doing it because we're moving everyone together. So as I was looking at that, I started to review how I got into this position at all, and some of the great things that I've learned over time about life experience and all of the mistakes I've made, and how I represent a particular type of person who has overcome a lot in the same way that all of these other brilliant people have. But one of the words that I stumbled on was this idea of a polymath, because I thought it had something to do with mathematics directly. And then I realized, oh, polymath is just someone who has a lot of different specialties all brought into one force. And so I just thought that was great. But I can understand polymaths. And that's something very specific to me, and I never thought it was anything special until I started to interact with friends yesterday, and I realized that I have this ability to bring people from different perspectives towards each other, and they learn to cooperate because I'm there, and I kind of serve in my own way as that bridge point. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? And then when I got it with the meditative thing, the description of my role, I went, oh, so that's what I've been cast in. Now, I don't have the degrees. And many of you don't have the degrees that Dr. Robert Gilbert or Mr. Grant have, or even William Meter have. But that doesn't exclude you from the conversations, which plays back to one of the last videos I did, where I was mentioning that one of the things that Conclave was working through was how some wording and vernacular used in sacred texts at the higher levels is either it excludes a certain demographic or can be taken that way, and how that has crystallized into an obstacle for new students to join the conversation. Again, because all students who are earnestly trying to ascend have access to ascension. The halls do not block you because you are of color or because you're a woman. And so as we rewrite that and change that, one of the things that I had noticed was that we had to get over or have the conversations where we own the elephants in the room in order to help new students arrive at the same destination, where they don't let other people block them by wording or whatever it is from gaining the same knowledge and wisdom that you would get like at an Ivy League school. And I had even referenced the fact that it's basically like you get invited to a table that's been set for you as a student that comes across this, and you are on the path to discovery, and you have to make the choices of your own accord, but you're going to come across people who don't necessarily want you to be a part of the club. And why would you let that stop you from going to Yale just because there's a fraternity who doesn't like gay guys, or whatever the affliction is, or whatever the marginalization is that we have? Why would you let them deter you from getting an Ivy League fucking degree? And so that is going to play a part into what moves forward as all of the other stuff gets kind of demoed down, and all of the hypocrisy and all the greed and all that stuff in the background that's going on that's being cleaned up by the higher ups. As that all plays out, we have specific functionality and roles that we have been assigned to now play as this new leg of the journey opens up to us. And what I'm getting from the impression is that they have finished the rewrites and have cast the roles according to your life experience and who you are. Do not be fooled by the fact that someone has a piece of paper to tell you that you don't belong in the conversation when you have done all the research and all the study that you've done. Don't let them try to discredit you. And please skip over the imposter syndrome, because if you are set by the divine into something like this, then who are they to question their choices? And in the end, that's going to be a big thing for a lot of us who are of color or marginalized in some way, because it was a boys club, or it was like, all white. I don't know. Whatever the biases were, because that's not true. We've talked about it. The Tibetan is not a misogynistic dickhead. Like there's a lot of ways that they have characterized it based on the person viewing it that had their own personality and their own life experience that may not have been the perfect depiction of the energy that they were speaking to. And so it's important for us as cohorts and as TAs and as people who are now moving into specific roles in this new epoch to understand, don't let other people talk you out of your blessings because they have their own issues. Everyone on planet Earth has a shadow. All of us have a shadow. And sometimes the shadow comes out to play. But when it comes to sacred texts and stuff like that, we have crystallized in such a way that we're not evolving. And if we don't evolve, we don't move forward. And the game stays stuck and gets even more and more corrupted, so nobody wants to play the game anymore. And so what they're doing is they're alleviating all of that in order to have people speak directly to it, in order to have what it looks like parameters set before us completely be obliterated by the minds of the students who were always meant to do that now. And that's an important part of like something that William Meter teaches, where there are a lot of students who are now tapped to actually serve in the world, whether on stage or behind the scenes, that were just trying to do what they were meant to do in the wrong time, meaning it wasn't time yet. The stage had not been set. The cast had not been assembled. There were still rewrites. There was still recasting. There was a new producer that was brought on. There was an executive producer. Now you have elders and masters and teachers all with their fingers in it. And they're trying to make it so they bring as many people as they can along for the ride. But in order to do that, there are adjustments that are made up until the time of filming. And so we needed to set the stage in order to bring everybody into alignment so they could hit their mark. And when they hit their mark, they got the next piece of the puzzle for them to move forward. And so with me, in particular with me, I was specifically told, don't worry about who or how, just do the video and help people understand where we're going. So to that end, this is what I was basically explaining. If you really want to understand the evolution of consciousness, one of the things you can do at a fundamental level is really get to know the different religious houses, because they will serve, not necessarily knowing them so in-depthly that you are a member of them, but at least understanding their aim, their mission, and what they're about. So things like Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, and the Islamic faith all have kernels of wisdom within each house that would be beneficial for students to understand, at least as a general consensus, so that they can then move into the more philosophical, theosophical societies that exist to move the species upward and onward. And so the next leg would then be, as a recommendation as a friend, would be then to study what is philosophy about. What is psychology about? What does the sociology do? What about spirituality and the evolution through the Aquarian Age and the New Age movement? And instead of playing it down and saying, oh, those silly rabbits, they're just going to pick it. Instead of doing that, finding why it exists to begin with, and then helping them rise as the newer class that is part of the greater puzzle. And then, of course, theosophy, which is the blending of spirituality and philosophy into a construct, where, again, I would lead you to visit William Meter, Dr. Gilbert, and then Dr. Grant, or Mr. Grant, which always makes me think of Mary Tyler Moore. But the three of them stand out to me as really great teachers that would help you understand where we're going after you've gotten the basics. So if you really want to be part of the new stage being set, I would say go to the fundamental level. Not fundamentalism, but understand the fundamentals of the foundation that's been set. Each house of faith stands as part of a greater construct, and each department has its own aim, its own mission. And the higher you go in elevation spiritually, the more you begin to understand how much we need to harmonize the different departments. But if you don't even know what each house does, because you have a bias or you're just not allowed to explore it, then you can't really join the conversation because you don't really understand why there's so many Christian houses and how Judaism is an Abrahamic religion. Like, you need to understand the fundamentals of it in order to understand the conversations that are about to be had by those that are returning teachers that are serving a greater, how do I say this play? I can't give too much. There are teachers dressed as students who are here for a reason. And if you want to understand what's playing around you and what's happening and why things are coming down and then being rebuilt, then it's important to have the foundational understanding of some of the things that are being looked at, including wording and so forth that is in different texts and different sacred symbols and all that stuff. Because it's important to realize that the way I laid the first foundation for those of you who are new students is to remember that I said specifically the houses of faith: Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, and the Islamic faith. And then I mentioned that it would be important for you to have a wealth of understanding, or at least an understanding generally of philosophy, psychology, sociology, theosophy, and spirituality. Because, as I said in the great Greek schools, someone who does not understand sacred geometry has no place, sometimes in the higher realms. But how do you marry those two if you don't first have an understanding of what it is that you're going towards? And so for a lot of pilgrims and students that are now going to be part of this new movement forward into this next 100-year cycle, understand that fundamental understandings of things is super important to at least then arrive at the table with a general understanding of what is being discussed before you move into the higher classes, which is where I would highly recommend William Meader, Dr. Robert Gilbert, and then Robert Edward Grant. These three people in particular, I mean, there are others that stick out to me, but these three are really instrumental because one of the things that I love about William Meader, is that he's a great bridge point to understand Alice Bailey's writings and then to move into Blavatsky's writing, which is super imperative. But he says it in a way that prepares you for what you're about to encounter. And so, like I said in that video, don't let certain colorful wording or the way that something was phrased to put you off of the ideal that was present in the statement. Just because someone colored it in the wrong way or their own bias or whatever happened, don't let that stop you. And so William Meader is a great catalyst for that. And then with Professor Dr. Robert Gilbert, who I absolutely love and adore, as I've stated, he is a great person to introduce you to Rudolf Steiner and some of the more other well-known Rosicrucians, and kind of the understanding of what the Rosicrucian order is about, and the connectability that it has with the esoteric, because the way that Robert Gilbert explains it is really brilliant. He says it's an esoteric Christianity, and that's a very important step for those of you who come from the house of Christ, right? So then, if you're more into Hermeticism, then from what I understand, from what I've seen, I've only seen a couple of things with him, but the way he observes the world and his interaction talking with the Egyptian times and so forth, and kind of the conversation that was so brilliantly had between the two of them, you understand some of the parallels that are running with each other. And he's a great person to introduce you to the scientific, philosophical minds that then might lead you to more Hermetic principles or study, or even to better understand someone like Alan Watts, who's kind of another bridge point for those of you who are more philosophical or psychological. Well, Alan Watts is another being that has been a great teacher for humanity. But I chose the three active living examples of bridge points for many students because they're actively alive. But let me tell you something. Emerson and Watts, Alan Watts, are crazy influential in a lot of what you're going to understand. But I wanted you guys to kind of understand what the foundational stones were before you even get to that. Because Alan Watts is so different, right? They couldn't be more opposite in some ways, and yet so similar in their delivery. And then one of the things that I would say is if I was teaching a class, I would literally have one layer after the fundamentals that would be literally Alan Watts and Buddhism. And then Mr. Meader and then Mr. Gilbert introducing the higher concepts, where Mr. Grant would then come in and speak to Hermeticism, and then go into the actual deeper classes where you study Alice Bailey, you study Blavatsky, you study all of these, and you understand who the Tibetan is, you understand what the 7 rays of light. But in the pathway that I've given you, you have the wherewithal to understand things that is way out of our reach when we first start. And one of the things you'll know in this journey, if you follow that kind of advice, is that you will revisit the same topics more than once. And if you, the more that you ascend, the more it's intuitive, or the algorithm will randomly send you something. It depends on how invested you are. And the universe will respond to your will to be of service. And it will guide you into an understanding of where this is all going, and then hopefully do what it did with me to provide me an answer as to what am I pivoting towards. And not to worry about how or where, or I mean how or who, but to just do the work and put it out there so as to, I guess, hit my mark. So in the end, what I was looking at, which is super important for the collective, is that we as a society have become so individualized that it's starting to break down the fabric of our existence. And if we want to strengthen or restructure or do anything to prevent total collapse, a lot of us are going to have to put the swords down and respect and come to the table with each other, understanding the role that each person is playing out of respect, and then do the conversations that happen, but on a bigger scale. So instead of just having 2 people brilliant minds like Dr. Gilbert and Mr. Grant, having the conversation amongst just themselves to include a third person or fourth person in a panel discussion, having the same synchronicities, showing how interdependent they are and how many threads of truth are all mirrored and parallels with each other, and kind of navigating that in a way that the audience is then able to go, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that's interesting. And then brings a greater skill set of enlightenment. Because many paths lead home. In fact, I've even mentioned this before. This is the era where science and faith come back together. And theosophy is a great means by which to do it, but so is psychology. And one of the things that people learn when they go to a psychologist is they learn to work with their shadow and why they do the things that they do. And inevitably, no matter what, no matter how scientific they are, they find their soul and they find their spirituality in that. And suddenly, those who even were against the woo-woo culture and the hippy-dippy shit, all of a sudden they're all on board because they've done the work that gets their soul to go, hey, where do you think this came from? It wasn't from you. You were happy partying and had no responsibility. I'm the one who grabbed your attention. So do you want to know who I am? And suddenly you're now not only interested in your own ego and who you are, but how you fit into the cosmology of life. And you begin to realize that each of you is a thought form in the mind of the all. Well, how does that work? And what happens when certain thought forms are brought into harmony with each other? And those thought forms are people who have engaging conversations with the world around them in a way that allows a layman to join the conversation. I've always said this, Joe Rogan is incredibly gifted at this skill set. But he likes to play the meathead sometimes. And as brilliant as he is, he has no problem with self-deprecation. I find him great. He's a great other example of another elevated consciousness that understands how to work with an audience. But he does a lot of celebrity interviews, and his focus is really about kind of more conspiracy type things. And I mean, he's just a brilliant mind, but he's got his own task, he's got his own lane, and he does it well. In fact, I would say that he does it pretty perfectly. And then you have someone like Lex Friedman. Lex Friedman is a great philosophical mind, and he's great at breaking down physics and science. And so imagine him having a conversation with a spiritualist, like let's say Gilbert and Grant, and what that would look like, or him having a conversation with me and William Meader, and the parallels that run between science and faith, and exploring those topics together. And you see where we're going as a collective. You see the stage that has been set, and many of you are starting to find the role that you will play. In the end, every student has the opportunity to ascend if they want to. You can't lead a dead horse to water because you can't make it drink anything. But what you can do is present the world with other options that don't have to do with AI or don't have to do with anything other than what it is to be human and how we fit into the grandscape of a universe that is an expansive consciousness that is actively aware that we're here. So what is our role? How do we be of service? All of those things come from exploration and ongoing conversations. And my last message to you is this. You now understand where this is going. If you are interested in talking to other people and stuff like that, don't hesitate to reach out, even if they don't respond. Because you never know what rooms your name have been mentioned that you're about to step into that have been waiting for you. And the reason I say that is a concluding thought, and it has to do with a dream I had. So in this particular dream that I've been keeping to myself because I just thought it was some sort of ego-ish thing, but now that this other one happened, makes sense. I was basically, I might have mentioned it in a video before, I'm not sure. But essentially what had happened is I was in this dream, and I was handed something, I was hand-selected to do something, and I got a script. And I was looking at the script, and I had been offered the role, and so I was being brought into a table read where I had never met any of the other characters. And in the vision that I, well, it was a dream, but I call it visions because it's night visions. So in the dream, I'm now nervous because I'm trying to do this, but I'm completely unaware of who the other actors are until the moment that the door opens and I realize who's behind the door. And the immediate thing that happened of oh my God, what am I doing here with these people? And what that dream revealed to me, though, that was interesting, and how it fits into the other dream that I just had, was they all knew who I was. In fact, when I sat down, they were all, before we started to actually do the run-through of the script, they were all talking to me about the work that they'd seen that I've done. Because apparently the director and the executive producers had sent them my reel or whatever it was. I'm not particularly an actor. I've done extra work, but anyway. So more stories. They had somehow come across my work, the executive producers and the people who had cast me in my role, and they wanted the other cast to know why I was chosen without me having to explain anything. Instead, they just gave it to them as like a dossier, I guess, of me. And when I walked in, and before we started to go through the read-through, they were all talking to me about how much they loved my writing and all this other stuff. And so, of course, when I woke up from that dream, I was like, what the hell is this? Like, my ego's not that, inflated. I was like, I don't know how this fits into my life. And that was during the part where I was telling you guys I could seriously sense that there was a major pivot coming. And in that pivot, what was interesting, I suddenly was told, you need to start working out again. And I was like, I don't need to work out. And they're like, no, you need to work out. And then they're like, and then coming up, I know that you don't really have an issue with alcohol, but we're going to probably ask you not to drink as much, or probably you're going to stop doing it. And I was like, that's fine. Alcohol is not my vice. I do it to be social. And they're like, well, that's why you won't need to do it anymore. So there was these small ideas that were popping into my head, but they were in fragmented form. And it wasn't until this particular dream happened where now I'm in the line, and I'm worrying about my old version of self as though I wasn't worthy. And they were like, that's the point. You are worthy. And the consistent thread between all of it is so are you. Guys, as we move up this ladder, and if you're involved in this brilliant new stage that's been set, understand that you have made it because of who you are. And though you are letting go of your old maybe anonymity or your own life in order to rise to the elevation point that they have given you, understand that you're taking the amalgamation of knowledge, wisdom, and experience with you. And that is what got you the part. So when you walk into these rooms that you have never been into, but your name has been stated, understand that it came from the highest of places. And what they say is what goes. So don't get stuck in imposter syndrome. Instead, just know that you're there for a reason, and trust that the person or the director or whoever, however this comes together, understands that you understand why they chose you. And it's as simple as because of the work you've done with your life and all that you've overcome. And sometimes the greatest way to move mountains is to have people who have moved the mountains themselves. And those serve as very intrinsic aspects to the greater plan. So don't sell yourself short. And if you ever want to know, and this happened yesterday, something that was really helpful, again, everything being in perfect alignment, I suddenly came across a podcast that was called Reliving Single. I think it's called the Reliving Single podcast with Erica Alexander and the woman, Kim Coles. And they're basically breaking down how their series operated and how it came into being. And the fact that all of this was going on behind the scenes made me take pause because I'd never been in a production or a creative process before to that degree. And lo and behold, this show literally took me step by step as to how the thought was processed, how they picked the cast, then how they did screen tests and the chemistry tests, and how they picked out what they were going to do and what was not allowed to do. And I suddenly was reminded of the hierarchy and this conclave that's been meeting at the top of the year, and how I had mentioned that they had basically reviewed all the tapes and just had made their decisions. So in the process, I would highly recommend, if you get an opportunity for those of you who are along for the ride, to know that if you've been cast in a role that is somehow of service to this ideal that's now coming into fruition, to understand that that's a really great way for you to understand some of the process that has been going on at the higher levels behind the scenes from a lot of energies that you may not have knew your name. Because many of you are very humble, and that's going to be the key to your success. It is through humility and grace that you reach the heart of men and women. And it is important to hold on to that as you move forward. But be not mistaken, you have been chosen. And in your having been chosen to do something of service to the world, don't be surprised if you run into people who know you, and don't feel like you're an imposter. Instead, embrace the fact that you earned that position. And that's where I'm going to leave it. Have a great day. Bye.